For years, Israel's Iron Dome was considered nearly untouchable. But last night, something changed. Iran launched hypersonic missiles traveling at Mach 15, carrying cluster warheads designed to overwhelm missile defenses. For 3 straight hours, the skies over central Israel filled with incoming missiles. And for the first time in this war, analysts began asking a new question. Did Iran just find a way through Israel's defenses? The night sky over central Israel lit up again, but this time the scale was different. Iran had launched the 37th wave of attacks under what it calls Operation True Promise, and almost immediately, analysts began to realize this was not another routine exchange of missiles. It was the longest sustained barrage of the entire conflict. For nearly 3 hours, missiles and drones arrived in successive waves aimed at central Israel. Sirens echoed across multiple cities, while air defense systems scrambled to track and intercept incoming threats. The tempo of the attack forced Israeli defense networks into continuous engagement, with interception systems firing repeatedly into the dark sky. But what made this barrage especially significant was the type of weapons involved. Iran reportedly deployed a combination of its newer Fattah hypersonic missiles alongside the heavier Khorramshahr ballistic missiles, systems capable of carrying extremely large explosive payloads. By launching different missile types simultaneously, the attack created a far more complex challenge for defensive systems trying to track and intercept each incoming threat. Reports began circulating that several missiles had penetrated Israel's multi-layered defense network. Even limited breakthroughs carry enormous implications in modern missile warfare. Each successful impact raises new questions about the capacity of defensive systems to handle sustained attacks at this scale. For military planners watching closely, the message was unmistakable. This barrage was not simply another round of retaliation. It was a signal that the conflict may be entering a far more dangerous phase, one defined by endurance, escalation, and increasingly powerful weapons. The scale of the barrage was only part of the story. What truly caught the attention of military analysts were the weapons used in the attack. At the center of the strike was Iran's Fattah missile, one of the newest additions to its arsenal and one that Iran has described as a hypersonic system. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles that follow a predictable arc, the Fattah is believed to use a maneuverable re-entry vehicle during its final descent. That maneuverability is critical. As the warhead re-enters the atmosphere at extreme speed, it can alter its trajectory, making it far more difficult for missile defense systems to calculate a stable interception point. For defensive radars and interceptor batteries, that unpredictability compresses the response window to just seconds. Alongside the Fattah, Iran reportedly launched the Khorramshahr ballistic missile. This system represents a different kind of threat. Rather than relying primarily on maneuverability, the Khorramshahr is built around raw payload capacity. Some versions are capable of carrying up to 1.8 tons of explosives, an unusually large warhead for a missile in its class. The missile also uses hypergolic fuel systems, allowing it to remain fueled and ready for launch for extended periods. That means launch crews can fire within minutes, rather than spending hours preparing the missile. But the real tactical innovation came from how these weapons were used together. Different missile types were launched in overlapping waves, each arriving at different speeds and trajectories. The objective was to challenge every layer of Israel's defense network simultaneously. Speed, unpredictability, and destructive power combined into a single coordinated attack. As Israeli defense officials analyzed the barrage, another troubling detail began to emerge. According to military briefings, a significant portion of the missiles fired in recent waves were not carrying single warheads at all. Instead, many were equipped with cluster payloads designed to disperse multiple explosive charges over a wide area. Some estimates suggested that nearly half of the incoming missiles carried this type of warhead. Cluster munitions work very differently from conventional ballistic payloads. Rather than detonating in a single explosion on impact, the missile opens mid-air during its descent. Inside the warhead are dozens of smaller submunitions, often called bomblets, that scatter across the target zone. Each of those bomblets then detonates individually. For missile defense systems, this creates a difficult challenge. Interceptors are designed to destroy incoming missiles before they reach the ground. But if a missile carrying cluster payloads breaks apart at high altitude, the resulting debris and submunitions can still spread across a wide area, even after interception. Instead of one impact point, defenders faced dozens. In several locations, casualties were reportedly caused not by the primary missile body, but by the scattered submunitions that followed. Beyond the tactical complications, cluster weapons carry a long history of international controversy. Unexploded bomblets can remain on the ground long after a conflict ends, posing risks to civilians who encounter them months or even years later. In modern missile warfare, their wide-area effect adds another layer of complexity to an already dangerous battlefield. While headlines focused on the missiles falling on cities, analysts began noticing another pattern hidden inside the attack sequence. Some of the most important targets were not urban areas at all. They were the sensors that watched the sky. Satellite imagery and open-source intelligence reports began revealing signs of damage at several military installations across the Gulf region. In multiple cases, the strikes appeared to focus on radar systems, communications nodes, and support infrastructure connected to missile defense operations. Among the most significant of these systems is the ENTPY-2 radar. This powerful X-band radar is a critical component of modern missile defense architecture. It can detect ballistic missile launches at extremely long distances, track their trajectories, and feed that data to interceptor systems such as THAAD and other defensive networks. Without early detection, those defensive systems lose precious time. And in missile warfare, seconds can determine whether an interception succeeds or fails. What analysts began noticing was a possible sequence in the attacks. Initial strikes appeared to focus on radar installations and surveillance equipment. Follow-up attacks then targeted communications infrastructure responsible for transmitting tracking data across the defense network. If that pattern is intentional, it suggests a deeper strategy. Rather than only targeting population centers, the objective may be to weaken the early warning systems themselves. Because if the radars are damaged or their communications disrupted, the defensive shield protecting entire regions begins to develop dangerous blind spots. As Iran intensified its missile campaign, Israel and the United States began expanding their response across multiple theaters. Israeli air power moved first. In a series of coordinated operations, dozens of Israeli fighter jets launched large-scale strikes against Iranian military infrastructure. Aircraft flew long-range missions targeting command centers, missile coordination facilities, and security compounds believed to be linked to Iran's operational planning. According to military briefings, more than 170 precision-guided munitions were delivered during these strikes. The objective was clear: disrupt the command networks responsible for organizing missile launches and weaken the infrastructure supporting Iran's broader military operations. At the same time, Israeli forces also began targeting launch teams before their weapons could even leave the ground. Intelligence-driven operations focused on intercepting mobile missile launchers and drone units preparing for deployment, attempting to reduce the number of attacks before they ever reached Israeli airspace. Meanwhile, the United States opened a separate front at sea. American naval forces operating in the Strait of Hormuz launched operations aimed at preventing Iranian attempts to deploy naval mines in one of the world's most critical energy corridors. Several vessels believed to be involved in mine-laying activities were intercepted and destroyed. But the battlefield was expanding further. From Lebanon's southern border, Hezbollah began launching its own attacks into northern Israel, opening a second front that forced Israeli forces to divide their military resources. What had begun as a missile confrontation was rapidly evolving into a broader regional war. In the early days of the conflict, several Western officials suggested that Iran's missile campaign was already weakening. Launch numbers appeared to be falling. At first glance, the data seemed encouraging. The massive opening barrages had slowed, and daily missile counts appeared lower than during the war's first phase. Some analysts interpreted this as evidence that airstrikes on Iranian launch infrastructure were beginning to take effect. But the pattern soon began to look more complicated. While the number of launches decreased, the destructive power of individual strikes appeared to increase. Instead of firing large salvos of smaller missiles, Iran began deploying fewer weapons, but with heavier warheads and more advanced delivery systems. The shift suggested a possible change in strategy. Early waves may have been designed to overwhelm radar networks and force defensive systems into constant engagement. Once those systems were strained, later strikes could focus on more powerful missiles capable of causing greater damage with fewer launches. For defenders, that transformation creates a new set of challenges. Israel's military estimates that Iran still possesses thousands of ballistic missiles across its arsenal. Even with ongoing airstrikes targeting launches and storage facilities, completely eliminating that capacity would be extremely difficult. And that means the conflict may still be entering its most dangerous phase. Government officials have already warned the public that more difficult days could lie ahead. Missile defenses remain active, airstrikes continue, and both sides appear determined to sustain the fight. What began as a sudden escalation is now evolving into something far more unpeered, a war where the next phase may prove even more dangerous than the first.